let's talk about steep approaches. So first of all, what is a steep approach? I will say this straight up. A lot of students, when they say steep approaches, they go very, very steep. Now, a steep approach only has to be between 13 and 15 degrees. So a typical approach, a normal approach in a helicopter is about 8 to 12 degrees. So it has to be just a little bit steeper. I see people all the time, they're trying to bring something in at, a 60-degree slope, something crazy. And you don't really have to do that. Certainly you don't have to do that for your flight test. Now, what is the biggest thing you have to worry about with this? You do not want to let yourself get into those settling with power or vortex ring state conditions. So you want to keep it above ETL speed, and you want to keep your descent rate below 300 feet per minute at the end of this when you get below that ETL. Now, if you come in too steep, you're basically going to ride that ETL buffeting all the way down, which is not really needed. You're making it extra hard on yourself, and you're getting rid of some of your safety margin when you do that. So how do you perform a steep approach? It's pretty simple. I always tell people what's the key word to this approach, and it's slow. Slow, slow, and slow. Don't try to come rocketing in on this approach. That's really, really hard. You want to slow it down. Now, here's the other thing. Remember that the collective controls your descent rate, and we're trying to have this zip line approach. You can't do that if you're going really fast and have your descent rate be below 300 feet per minute, right? Because your descent rate has to match up with your approach speed. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Some people, they just go steep all the way down. A slightly better technique is, let's say there's an obstacle like this tree here. You want to come just above it, nice and level, and then start coming down. That way you're not doing a steep approach from some insane altitude. So how do you do it? You're going to basically start slowing down, and you're going to come in and you're going to be monitoring things like your airspeed. You're going to be looking at your descent rate. And if you start feeling some shuddering and it goes away, push forward on the cyclic. That means that you've descended below ETL speed. And that's kind of a problem. So what are some common errors with this? People that don't maintain their proper RPMs. Sometimes they fixate on something and the RPM control gets away from them. They don't use the collective properly. They're not having that nice constant descent angle. They're not maintaining their direction. If they start changing the power, especially when you're going slow, you're going to have to be on the pedals. Also, if you started your descent way too high, this is pretty common, where you get excessively slow in order to try to maintain your descent angle. Not noticing when you're losing ETL. You just kind of fly through it, the shuddering stopped. So typically when you do this approach, as you're coming to the very end of it, you're pushing forward. You're pushing forward to your spot. Or you might also fail to arrive at your hover height with 0 ground speed. You might be moving forward a little bit, or even worse, moving backward. You could be having a low RPM in your transition to the hover, using too much aft cyclic close to the surface, and that could result in something like a tail strike. Failing to align the landing gear with the direction of travel. This is something I see quite a bit, especially on a windy day, where people let the helicopter weather vane into the wind. That's not what you want. You want to align the skids with the direction of travel once you've gotten down to a lower altitude. It's certainly acceptable and desired that you crab into a crosswind so that your ground track is straight, but it is not desirable for you to be close to the ground and the skids are not pointing in the direction of travel. If you were to have some unintentional contact with the ground, then you're likely going to roll your helicopter. All right, let's try a nice steep approach. Losing a little altitude out here, getting ready to turn my base. Getting it down to about 300 AGL. Turning on to my final. Pocono traffic helicopter for 6 is final for 311 Pocono. Alright, so now I want to start getting it slow down. Now it's a steep approach, kind of a common student mistake I see a lot, is people will try to make this super steep. A steep approach is 12 to 15 degrees, not 40 degrees. I see that a lot, so nice and slow, keeping it above ETL, keeping my descent rate in check. I want to make sure I'm below 300 feet per minute on my descent. Once I get below ETL, I can be a little higher than that now. Right now I'm about 400. I'm just kind of bringing it down. And as I start to get near the bottom of this, I'm actually going to have to push forward toward my spot. So I'm pulling in a little bit of power, pulling in a little bit more power, pulling in a little bit more power, a little more power, a little more power, a little more power, and there you go, right to the ground. That's a steep approach.